Ladies and gentlemen, when we think of the United States today, we often picture a vast nation stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific, a land of remarkable diversity, culture, and opportunity. But this grandeur did not come about overnight. The story of how the United States expanded is a story of vision, ambition, conflict, and resilience. A story that begins long before the first settlers arrived and continues to echo in the fabric of the nation. From the earliest days of European colonization, the seeds of expansion were being planted. In the 17th and 18th centuries, European powers, primarily Britain, France, and Spain, established settlements across North America, each vying for territory, resources, and influence. The British colonies along the eastern seaboard became a hub for commerce, agriculture, and political thought, laying the foundations for what would eventually become the United States. Life in these colonies was far from easy, marked by harsh winters, laborious farming, and frequent conflicts with indigenous peoples who had inhabited the land for centuries. Yet these settlers were driven by the promise of freedom, economic opportunity, and the hope of a new beginning. The Revolutionary War of 1775 to 1783 marked a turning point, not just politically, but in terms of the nation's ability to consider expansion as a central goal. Independence brought with it the responsibility of defining borders and establishing governance over a vast territory that stretched from the Atlantic coast to the edges of the Mississippi River. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 recognized American independence and ceded significant lands from Britain to the fledgling nation. This vast territory, known as the Northwest Territory, became the focus of settlement and governance, giving rise to a new era of exploration and migration. During the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the young United States embarked on a path of westward expansion, driven by the belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the nation was destined to stretch across the continent. This ideology was both inspiring and contentious, blending optimism with a justification for displacing indigenous populations and reshaping the land according to American ideals. Early explorers, surveyors, and settlers ventured into territories that were largely unknown to European Americans, mapping rivers, mountains, and plains while establishing trading posts, farms, and towns. One of the most significant milestones in this period was the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Negotiated by President Thomas Jefferson, the United States acquired approximately 828,000 square miles of territory from France, effectively doubling the size of the nation overnight. This vast tract of land encompassed the Mississippi River Valley and extended westward to the Rocky Mountains, providing fertile soil for agriculture, rivers for trade, and land for future settlement. The Louisiana Purchase was more than a territorial acquisition. It was a bold statement about the United States' ambitions and its willingness to seize opportunities for growth. Following the Louisiana Purchase, expeditions such as those led by Meriwether, Lewis, and William Clark further explored the Western Territories, gathering knowledge about geography, resources, and indigenous cultures. These journeys were instrumental in shaping the nation's understanding of its own potential and provided a blueprint for settlement, trade, and governance. Alongside exploration came the establishment of transportation networks, roads, and ports, linking distant communities and fostering economic growth. The early 19th century also saw the United States engage in a series of territorial acquisitions and conflicts that would shape its continental reach. The annexation of Florida in 1819, through negotiation with Spain, brought valuable coastal land under American control. Meanwhile, the westward migration of settlers intensified, particularly through the expansion into the Old Northwest and the Mississippi Valley. Pioneers traveled by wagon, river, and trail, seeking fertile farmland and economic opportunity. The movement westward was fueled not only by ambition, but also by technological and infrastructural advances, including the development of canals, steamboats, and eventually railroads, which facilitated the movement of people and goods across vast distances. The question of expansion, however, was inseparable from political and social tensions. As new territories were acquired, debates over slavery, governance, and representation grew increasingly complex. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was an early attempt to balance the interests of free and slave states, highlighting how territorial growth could ignite national conflict. Westward expansion was therefore both an opportunity and a source of profound challenge, testing the ability of the United States to integrate diverse lands and populations into a coherent national framework. One of the most emblematic examples of expansion in the 19th century was the annexation of Texas. After gaining independence from Mexico in 1836, Texas existed as a republic for nearly a decade before joining the United States in 1845. The decision to annex Texas was influenced by both strategic considerations and economic interests, particularly the desire for land suitable for cotton cultivation. The annexation, however, provoked tensions with Mexico, leading to the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. This conflict would ultimately reshape the map of North America, resulting in the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, through which the United States gained vast territories, including present-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of several other states. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 accelerated the pace of expansion. The gold rush attracted hundreds of thousands of settlers, miners, and entrepreneurs, transforming California into a vibrant economic hub and prompting rapid infrastructural and political development. Railroads, ports, and towns sprang up almost overnight, facilitating trade and migration while cementing the United States' presence on the Pacific coast. By the mid-19th century, the dream of a transcontinental nation was becoming a reality, as the United States now spanned from the Atlantic seaboard to the Pacific Ocean. Throughout this period, the impact on indigenous populations was profound and often tragic. Expansion frequently entailed the displacement of Native American tribes, the erosion of traditional ways of life, and violent conflicts. Policies such as the Indian Removal Act of 1830 led to forced migrations, most notoriously the Trail of Tears, which claimed thousands of lives. Pursuit of expansion and settlement often came at a steep human cost, highlighting the moral and ethical complexities of nation building. In addition to land acquisition, the United States expanded its influence through diplomacy and negotiation. Treaties with European powers, agreements with neighboring nations, and strategic purchases all contributed to the nation's growth. The Oregon Treaty of 1846, for instance, peacefully resolved territorial disputes with Britain, securing the Pacific Northwest for the United States. Such agreements demonstrated the importance of diplomacy alongside exploration and conflict in shaping the nation's territorial destiny. The latter half of the 19th century witnessed the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, a monumental achievement that physically linked the eastern and western parts of the country. This infrastructural marvel facilitated commerce, migration, and cultural exchange, while symbolizing the technological prowess and ambition of the United States. Railroads, telegraphs, and later innovations in communication and industry transformed the nation from a collection of disparate regions into an interconnected, cohesive entity capable of sustaining further expansion and economic growth. Economic motivations continue to drive expansion, particularly in agriculture, mining, and trade. Fertile lands in the Midwest and Great Plains supported large-scale farming, while natural resources in the West fueled mining and industrial development. Expansion was not merely a matter of acquiring land. It was a deliberate strategy to harness resources, stimulate commerce, and ensure national prosperity. The lure of opportunity attracted immigrants from Europe, Asia, and elsewhere, contributing to the nation's cultural diversity and providing labor for the growing economy. Political developments intertwined closely with territorial growth. Debates over statehood, representation, and governance often reflected broader national tensions. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, for example, intensified conflicts over slavery and territorial sovereignty, setting the stage for the Civil War. Expansion, while a symbol of ambition and progress, also brought to the forefront unresolved questions about the nation's values, identity, and social structure. Following the Civil War, the United States resumed and accelerated its westward expansion. Policies such as the Homestead Act of 1862 encouraged settlement by offering land to individuals willing to cultivate it, fostering migration and development across the Great Plains and beyond. Simultaneously, the conquest of the western frontier brought military campaigns against Native American tribes, reflecting a continued pattern of conflict and displacement. By the end of the 19th century, the frontier had largely been settled, and the United States had achieved the continental scope envisioned by early leaders. Overseas expansion also emerged as a new dimension of growth at the turn of the 20th century. The Spanish-American War of 1898 resulted in the acquisition of territories such as Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, signaling the nation's emergence as a global power. Expansion was no longer solely continental. It was increasingly international, driven by strategic interests, economic opportunities, and geopolitical considerations. This phase of expansion reflected the evolution of the United States from a regional power into a player on the global stage, capable of projecting influence far beyond its borders. Throughout the history of American expansion, certain themes recur: ambition, opportunity, conflict, and adaptation. The nation grew not only through land acquisition, but also through innovation, diplomacy, and the resilience of its people. Yet expansion was not without consequences. Indigenous populations were displaced, wars were fought, and the environment was transformed. These challenges underscore the complexity of growth, reminding us that progress often comes at a price. As we reflect on the history of how the United States expanded, we see a story that is at once inspiring and cautionary. It is a story of vision and determination, of exploration and settlement, of triumph and tragedy. From the earliest colonies to the vast continental nation, from the Louisiana Purchase to the Pacific coast, from the frontier to overseas territories, the expansion of the United States shaped not only its geography but its identity, economy, and society. In conclusion, the history of American expansion is more than a chronicle of land acquisitions or territorial growth. It is a testament to the ambition and resilience of a nation, the consequences of its choices, and the enduring impact of its decisions on people and the land. Understanding this history allows us to appreciate the scale of the achievement, recognize the complexity of its challenges, and reflect on the moral and social questions that accompanied the nation's growth. Expansion defined the United States in ways both tangible and intangible, leaving a legacy that continues to influence the country's development, values, and place in the world. As we consider this story today, we are reminded that expansion was not merely about territory. It was about people, ideas, and the interplay between opportunity and responsibility. It shaped the United States into the nation we know today, and its lessons remain relevant for understanding the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. The expansion of the United States was driven by ambition, ideology, and opportunity, shaped by exploration, settlement, and conflict. From the very beginnings of the nation, there was an almost magnetic pull toward the unknown lands beyond the original 13 colonies. Ambition fueled the desires of leaders, settlers, and visionaries alike, who saw in the vast, untamed wilderness the promise of wealth, influence, and national greatness. It was an ambition that was both personal and collective, personal in the hope of land ownership, trade, and a better life, and collective in the drive to see the young nation establish itself as a continental power recognized and respected among the world's established nations. Ideology played a central role in shaping this expansion. The belief in manifest destiny, which would later become the defining principle of westward growth, held that it was not only the right but also the duty of the United States to spread its ideals, culture, and governance from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This ideology was a lens through which Americans justified their movements, their treaties, and sometimes even their conflicts. It suggested a moral imperative, a sense that the nation's growth was preordained, and that the people of the United States were uniquely positioned to bring progress and civilization to vast, undeveloped territories. Opportunity, however, was often the most tangible driver of expansion. The land itself offered fertile soil, abundant resources, and access to rivers, forests, and minerals that promised prosperity. From the rich farmlands of the Mississippi Valley to the gold-laden hills of California, settlers saw opportunities that could transform their lives. Traders, entrepreneurs, and families all moved westward, navigating difficult terrain, unpredictable weather, and sometimes hostile encounters, all for the promise of something greater than what they had left behind. But this drive for expansion was never a peaceful or simple process. Exploration, settlement, and conflict were inseparable elements of the American story. Explorers mapped rivers, mountains, and plains, learning not only the geography of the continent, but also the complex patterns of indigenous habitation and natural resources. Settlers followed, often carving out farms, towns, and trade routes from what had previously been wilderness. Yet expansion also brought inevitable conflict between nations, between settlers and indigenous populations, and within the nation itself, as debates over governance, slavery, and land rights intensified. Every new territory brought with it questions of identity, law, and morality, shaping not only the physical borders of the United States, but also the political and social fabric of the nation. In essence, the expansion of the United States was more than a territorial journey. It was a story of human aspiration and ambition, a narrative of ideals and dreams, and a chronicle of challenges that tested the resolve, ingenuity, and conscience of a growing nation. It was a journey that reshaped the land, transformed communities, and laid the foundation for the United States as a continental power. Economic interests, political strategy, and territorial acquisitions played central roles in shaping the nation's growth. From the very earliest days of the Republic, leaders and citizens alike recognized that the wealth and security of the United States depended not only on its population or military, but also on land it controlled and the resources it could access. Economic motivations were deeply intertwined with expansion. Fertile soil, rich forests, navigable rivers, and later, mineral deposits offered settlers and entrepreneurs opportunities to prosper, while also strengthening the economic foundation of the nation. Farmers moved westward to cultivate vast tracts of land, merchants sought new trade routes and markets, and pioneers ventured into unfamiliar territories with hopes of discovering resources that could transform communities into thriving centers of commerce. Every river settled, every plot of farmland claimed, and every mine opened was not merely an act of survival. It was an economic calculation that contributed to the broader growth of the nation. Political strategy was equally critical. Expansion was not just about land, it was about power. Every new territory posed questions about governance, representation, and influence within the national framework. The acquisition of land was carefully considered in light of how it might shift political balances, especially between regions with differing economic systems and social structures. For example, debates over whether new territories would allow slavery or prohibit it sparked national discussions, compromises, and eventually conflicts that would shape the political landscape. For decades, leaders understood that controlling territory meant controlling resources, trade, and influence, both within the United States and in the eyes of the world. Diplomatic negotiations, treaties, and even wars were tools through which political strategy intersected with expansion, ensuring that the nation's growth was not merely accidental but deliberate and calculated. Territorial acquisitions, meanwhile, were the tangible outcomes of this interplay between economics and politics. The Louisiana Purchase, the annexation of Texas, the Oregon Treaty, and the lands gained following the Mexican-American War all expanded the United States' physical borders and opened new avenues for settlement, commerce, and governance. Each acquisition reflected careful consideration of both immediate benefits and long-term implications. They were not just parcels of land, they were opportunities to project influence, strengthen security, and solidify the nation's place on the continent. In combination, these forces, economic ambition, political calculation, and territorial expansion, created a dynamic momentum that shaped the very identity of the United States. Expansion was never a neutral or purely geographic process. It was a deliberate strategy to ensure the nation's prosperity, stability, and power. Every new frontier conquered or negotiated became a testament to the intertwined nature of wealth, politics, and territory, demonstrating that the story of America's growth is as much about strategy and opportunity as it is about courage and vision. Expansion brought both progress and conflict, impacting indigenous peoples, neighboring nations, and the environment in ways that were profound and often irreversible. As settlers moved westward, the United States experienced remarkable progress. Towns and cities emerged where there had been only forests or plains. Roads, canals, and later railways connected distant regions, fostering commerce, communication, and cultural exchange. Agricultural innovation transformed the land into productive farmland, while industry and trade flourished, bringing wealth and opportunities to millions of Americans. The idea of progress was visible everywhere in bustling market towns, in the growth of universities and schools, and in the rise of new states joining the Union. Expansion was, in many ways, the engine that powered the nation's development and shaped its identity as a land of opportunity and enterprise. Yet this progress came at a significant cost, and nowhere was that cost more apparent than in the lives of indigenous peoples. The lands that settlers claimed were home to nations and communities with deep histories, cultures, and spiritual connections to the land. Expansion often meant forced displacement, broken treaties, and violent confrontations. Policies like the Indian Removal Act of 1830 led to forced relocations, most infamously resulting in the Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans perished during the March to New. Designated territories. Indigenous communities faced not only the loss of land, but the disruption of their traditional ways of life, their social structures, and their cultural heritage. Expansion, while celebrated as progress by some, represented profound suffering and injustice for others. Neighboring nations, too, were profoundly affected. The push westward brought the United States into direct conflict and negotiation with European powers, Mexico, and Britain. Territorial disputes often escalated into wars or tense diplomatic standoffs, as seen in the annexation of Texas and the Mexican-American War. Borders were redrawn, sovereignty challenged, and the balance of power in North America shifted. Expansion was rarely a peaceful process. It was a complex dance of ambition, negotiation, and sometimes force, with consequences for both domestic and international relations. The environment also bore the marks of American expansion. Vast forests were cleared for farming, Rivers were dammed for transportation and irrigation, and mining transformed mountains and plains. Wildlife populations declined, ecosystems were altered, and the natural landscape that had sustained generations of indigenous peoples and early settlers was irreversibly changed. While expansion enabled economic growth and settlement, it also demonstrated humanity's power to transform, and sometimes devastate, the natural world. In sum, the story of expansion is a story of contrasts. It brought roads, cities, and prosperity, yet it also brought displacement, conflict, and environmental change. Progress and suffering were intertwined, reminding us that the growth of a nation is never simple or without consequences. Understanding these complexities allows us to appreciate both the achievements and the costs of expansion, and to reflect on the responsibility that comes with shaping a land, a society, and a nation